Hi there, this is Stacy from Watercolor Together, and I had started making a series for the absolute beginner. Lessons 1 and 2 are already posted. It's been a little while since I have uploaded, in part because I had really a lot of things going on in my personal life, and good stuff, just really time consuming, and it meant that I didn't have time to film in the evenings after work or even on the weekends. And so some of that has settled down. I actually had intended to post something last week, and then I got the flu, so I was out for pretty much a whole week, but I'm feeling much better, and I'm glad to be back here and uploading our lesson 3 for the absolute beginner. So if you haven't seen lessons 1 and 2, I suggest that you check those out first. I'm trying to post these in a sequential way so that they build on one another, and the intention behind this series is to make YouTube tutorials that really are more classroom style instead of just a quick paint along, and so they tend to be a little bit longer. I do add chapters so that if you can't get it done all in one day, or you don't have the time to sit down and paint all at once, that you can go ahead and come back to the videos. So we're going to do a short section on technique today, and then we're going to spend more time on painting our subject painting, which is sunflowers. I really love painting sunflowers because I feel like they are this really nice bridge between summer and fall. They're still bright and yellow and sunshiny, and they feel like summer, but you also know that fall is coming when they start blooming. Okay, so we're going to talk about supplies, we'll look at the reference photo, and we're going to talk about a couple of techniques, and then we'll get started with the actual painting. All right, thanks so much for joining me. If you like this content, or if you want to see more videos in this series, make sure that you hit the subscribe button, which I think is like right there. All right, and let's get started. Okay, you're going to want your watercolor paints, paint brushes, water jars, water spritz or sponge, and then for paper, I have one 9x12 piece that I cut into a 9x9 square. That's what we're going to use to paint our sunflower, and then I have this little strip that I'm going to use to demonstrate our 2 techniques that we're using today. I also have a 6x6 piece of paper, and it is divided into 6 this way and 3 this way, so that each of my rectangles is 1 inch by 2 inch. We're going to use this to explore a new part of color theory. And then I have my color wheel. If you don't have a color wheel in person, you can use something online just as a reference so that you can look at the colors, and we're going to actually be playing with complementary colors today, so you're going to want to be able to find the color across from one another. And then I have a pencil, a kneaded eraser, and I'm going to include this. This is the drawing that we're going to use for our sunflower, and so I drew it first in my sketchbook, and then I made a copy of it. I do that often because it's much easier to draw in a sketchbook than it is on watercolor paper, and then I can play with my lines, and then once I have it done, I make a Xerox copy of it, because that way I can use this to transfer onto my watercolor paper, and I can use it over and over and over again. If I do it right out of this sketchbook, it's a little harder, and so this makes a great way to be able to transfer the same thing and practice the same image again and again. So I highly recommend doing that. I'll make sure that this is linked in the bottom. Okay, I'm going to put the camera up in the tripod, and let's get started with our first technique. Okay, so what are complementary colors? Complementary colors are colors that are across from one another from the color wheel. And so blue violet and yellow orange are complementary colors. Green and red violet are complementary colors. So anything that is across the color wheel from one another, those are considered complementary colors. And the reason that they're so useful to us is that they can neutralize one another. They do some really cool things, and we can use these to build shadow areas in a painting. So on this piece of paper, what we're going to do is paint each of the complementary colors across from one another, and then we're going to mix them to see what that result is in the middle. So let's start with, and you might not have an exact color. We're just going to come close. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be exact. All right, so go ahead and take your paints and give them a spritz to hydrate them. You're going to want a swatch chart. If you haven't made a swatch chart for your paints, make sure that you make one, because this is such a great reference for when we're trying to find a particular color. It's a lot easier to see the result that you're going to get from each of your paints as opposed to just looking in the pans, because they look pretty different in the pans than they do on paper. I always make swatch charts. I think that they're super helpful. And they're fun to paint out too. So, and you can see like on my swatch charts, what I like is a mid value. I go over it a second time to create a darker value, and then I have a wash. There are lots and lots of different ways to do this. All right, so let's start with, I'm going to use a size 6 paintbrush. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to use I'm going to use a size 5. Okay, I don't want it to be too big. And sometimes when my brush is a little bit bigger, ooh, you know what? Let me move my water tray over this way so you don't have to watch my arms swishing over in front of the camera. Usually I paint with my water up above, but when I'm filming, I actually try to move things around a bit. And I had forgotten about it. It's been so long. Okay, now let's start with this yellow. And the yellow that we're going to choose is going to be kind of a really nice neutral yellow, very bright. We're going to, not something that's got too much orange in it. And so mine actually has some green mixed in because I always use this for leaves. Okay, so we're just going to pull some of that paint here, and I'm going to paint that in this first square. And this is just going to become a nice reference that can be used when you're thinking about complementary colors. Of course, you can always explore and swatch things out. When I paint, I tend to have smaller pieces of paper near me that I can grab, and I can explore how different things are going to mix together. But I really like having some of these bigger charts as references, overall references, and it helps you to get to know your paint. Sometimes if you, I know I'm rambling here a little bit, but sometimes if you want to sit down, you want to paint, but you're just really not sure what to paint, you can paint a chart. You know, like paint a chart of the way you could mix up different greens, or everything you could do with your quinacridone pink. Like take your quinacridone pink and then mix it into all of your other colors and make a chart to see how that affects all of your other colors. It's really helpful in you're practicing getting nice even tones and washes, but you're also really learning how your paint operates and the kinds of things that you can get out of your paint. Okay, so what's across the color wheel from yellow is a violet. So I'm going to use, I have this really nice, it's called Permanent Blue Violet. And so I'm going to just pull that out. I need a little more water here. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to paint that on this side. And then what we're going to do is mix them together to see how they neutralize one another. And I think I'm going to do it twice. I think what I'm going to do first is I'm going to paint two little squares here. I'm going to paint the yellow with a bit of purple in it. So I'm just going to pull a little purple in the yellow, and you can see how that makes this red really lovely golden kind of neutralized yellow. And then on this side, I'm going to add more purple, or violet actually, with the yellow, and I'm going to get this. So we can kind of see what happens to each of those, and you can let them touch if you want to see how they're going to blend in together. Okay, so this is how these two colors neutralize each other. All right, let's try, and we're just going to go around. What we're going to do, because we have 6, we're going to just kind of work our way around this way until we get back to violet, and then we'll end up with all 12 colors on the color wheel on here. Okay, so the next one we're going to do is we're going to look at a yellow orange, and so for me that is my it's kind of a mix. Okay, I'm going to grab a little bit of my Azo yellow. Oh yeah, that's it. This is my Azo yellow medium, but right now it's kind of dirty. I've got some orangey colors mixed into there. I don't want it to be too orange, but I don't want it to be too yellow either. So I'm going to use my color wheel. That's a really nice mix. Okay, so now let's go ahead and grab some of that up, and we're going to paint that in this square here. All right, and what's across from the yellow orange on the color wheel is a blue violet. So what I'm going to do to make this color is I'm going to start with my Phthalo blue red shade because it's already got some red undertones, but I want to give it just a little bit more violet. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab a bit of my blue violet color and mix it in. There we go. Now we've got a really nice blue violet. Maybe just a touch more. Okay. Oh, that's perfect. Okay. It's almost like a denim-y, inky color. I just love that. All right. So now I'm going to fill that in over here. I'm being pretty sloppy about this because this is just really just kind of an experiment here. Not worrying about perfection. All right, I am going to rinse my brush off because I'm going to just pull a little bit in to the yellow. And you can see, there we go. It's a yellow-orange color, and so I get this really nice kind of neutralized version of that yellow. And when I pull it in more into the blue, you can see that I get almost like a gray blue. Let those touch. There we go. Okay. Now let's make our way into the next color on the color wheel, which is orange. So we're going to grab orange. I have a cadmium orange here. So I'm going to make up a nice puddle of that. And let's come over here and paint that in. I actually probably could use a slightly bigger brush. Okay, and now across the color wheel is a very clear blue. So we are going to pull out, I think I'm going to use my cobalt blue, which has some green mixed into it. I let my wells mix together a lot, in part because I like my paints a little neutralized. I tend to paint landscapes that way, and so you can see my palette gets a little sloppy. All right, let's take a little bit of this blue and mix it in. Ooh, too much. Should have rinsed off my brush first. That's okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so we're gonna mix a little bit of that blue into the orange. Oh my gosh, look at how pretty that is. All right, and let's pull some of that orange into this blue. You see a really nice neutralized blue. Oh, you know what I didn't do was paint my sample of blue over here. Let's do that. All right. Okay, and now the next color we're going to move towards is our red orange. And so for me, my red orange is vermilion. This is a Rembrandt color, and I really, really, really love it. It is such a beautiful red orange. And I use a touch of this in green all the time to make a really nice olivey. If I need a neutralized green for something, I just grab just a touch of this or a touch of my cad orange. And it does a really good job. Okay, I feel like there. Got a little too much water in there. All right, there we go. That's gonna be our red orange. All right, and what's across the color wheel from my red orange is a blue green. And so to make my blue green, I'm gonna start with my phthalo blue or phthalo green blue shade, which is very green. And I'm gonna add just a touch of cobalt blue. And that makes a really pretty turquoise. There we go. Okay, oh, and look at how close that is. Maybe a touch more blue. All right, and let's paint that swatch out here. Okay, and we're gonna pull a bit of that turquoise into the orange. Oh my gosh, look at how pretty that color is. I love it. That's beautiful. It's so earthy. All right, and now we're going to do the opposite, and we're going to pull a little bit of that orange into the blue, or this like blue turquoise, blue green, however you want to label it. And it's also a beautiful color. Let those touch. All right. Now, the next color on the color wheel is this bright red. For me, I have on my palette, this is a Daniel Smith color, and it is permanent red. I don't have pyro red. I bought this when I was first starting with Daniel Smith paints, and I was trying to save a few bucks, and I'm kind of sorry I did. I wished I had purchased the more expensive pyro red. Okay, here we go. This is our nice kind of fire engine-y red color. And now, on the other side of that, we have green. Now the green that I have has a bit of yellow undertones, but, ooh, what should we do? Decisions. Okay, let's start with, I'm actually going to start with I'm going to have to mix this. So I'm starting with this is phthalo green blue shade. And what I'm going to do to get a bit more, to bring it a bit more here. So I use sap green, but sap green has a lot of yellow in it, too much yellow. And so I'm going to just add just a touch of permanent yellow in here. There we go. In order to bring myself to a shade that is similar to what's on my color wheel. I'm going to need just a touch more. There we go. And sometimes it takes a second. And I'm trying to rinse my brush in between so that I keep my yellows kind of pure for when we do our sunflower. Okay, too much. All right, perfect. Took a few tries, but that's okay. All right, so now that's going to be our nice kind of grassy green. I never would really paint with this kind of a green in a painting, very rarely. I like the colors in the middle here, with maybe like little pops of the brightness of these other colors. Okay, so let's mix in a little bit of the green into the red. Oh, look at how pretty that is. It's this really interesting kind of, it's really pretty. I just love that. All right, and then let's do the same in the green. We're going to get a little bit of that red in there, a little bit more. All right, you can see you get this beautiful, almost olivey kind of neutral green. That's so pretty. Okay, and then the last color and then we're going to be back to violet, is this red violet. And so for red violet, I have quinacridone violet, and that's going to work really well. So I'm going to pull that up. You see that's very similar to our red violet. I need to hydrate my paints a bit better. All right, and let's paint that here. And then on the other side of red violet is yellow green. So I'm going to start with my sap green, and I'm probably going to need to add just a bit more yellow to it. All right, there's my sap green. You can see it needs just a bit more yellow. So I'm going to pull a little bit of lemon yellow in here. There we are, we're pretty close. Okay, so here is my yellow green. And let's go ahead and mix a little bit of that green into the violet. And oh my gosh, we get this beautiful neutral color. And now let's go back and mix it into the green. And we get a beautiful green. And depending on how much of one color or the other you put into here, you're going to get different results. So one other thing that I wanted to point out, and this was intentional, we started on this side of the wheel, and so we really have all warm colors on this side and all of our cool colors on this side. So not only did we talk about complementary colors, but we did the exercise in a way that it divides the color wheel into warm and cool. So anyway, this can be super, super useful in watercolor painting. First, for when you want to neutralize something. When you need something, oftentimes when you're painting a landscape, for example, and you have your trees, they might be these brighter colors up front, but as they move into the distance, they are more neutralized. And so we can paint this foliage in the foreground and the middle grounds. We kind of move a little bit more neutral, but then we start to get really neutralized off into the background. So we're going to move into these kinds of colors. And the same is true for everything, whether we're talking about buildings or the sky. Sometimes it's really bright blue up at the top of right above you, and then as you move farther back into the horizon, it gets lighter and softer. And so and we can use this to neutralize our colors. So if we have this really bright blue sky and we want to neutralize it as we get off to the horizon, we get just a touch of orange to do that. All right, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and but how we're going to use this today is we're going to glaze and layer. So this project is going to involve glazing, negative painting, and complementary colors. Those are the three things that we're going to use. So this is using complementary colors. Glazing means that we work in layers. And so now I have this little sample piece of paper. It's just really to give you a demonstration. If you want to trace out a lemon and do this with me, you can. Don't worry about this. You can even just do a circle if you want. If you want to just quickly draw a circle or a rectangle or really whatever. And what I want to do is show how when we use complementary colors. So the complementary color of, I'm going to switch to a bigger brush. Let me put this away. And I'm going to pull out my size 6. This is a Da Vinci Maestro. This is a really generous size 6, so it's probably more comparable to like a size 7 or a size 8 in most brush lines. I always like to say that because here, this is a good example. Like these are size 6 brushes in another line versus my size 6. So if you're using something like a Princeton, you would need to use a size 8 in order to get a brush that's similar in size to what I have. I feel like I'm kind of a broken record with that, but if you're just tuning in now, I want to make sure that I'm very clear about the things I'm using. So there's no confusion. Okay, so for my lemon, what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine that I have a light source that's coming from this direction. And that is going to put my shadow in here and maybe a little bit back here because we've got a rounded object, right? And maybe a little bit underneath of here. So I'm going to start and kind of an underpainting or glaze layer of violet. And I'm going to just paint the violet where there are shadows. I'm going to make sure that I don't have too much water on my brush, and I'm using a pretty light version. Now I will say that when we're using a complementary color and we're going to glaze over it, if we put a really intense version down, the effect is going to be really strong, and generally speaking, or at least my preference is to use a softer, lighter version that is more subtle. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring in and paint this purple. I'm going to kind of come up like this. I'm going to go a little bit here and a little bit up in here. And now I'm going to rinse off my brush and get some water, and I'm just going to kind of drag this out because it's round, right? So we want to kind of drag it and soften it out here. I'm going to get a bit more right in here. Okay, right in here, that can be a little bit more dark. Okay, now I'm just I'm just popping that purple in and I'm painting that shadow, right? Let's add a little bit more in here. Okay, so now we've got this really nice shadow. I might bring this up, bring the water up a little bit this way. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and dry this. I have a new dryer actually. I haven't even used it yet. My husband ordered it for himself and it didn't work for what he needed it, and so I thought I would try it. What I like about the idea of this is that there's no heat to it. It's only air and it recharges, which makes it super convenient. So we'll see how it works. Well, he did say the buttons were a little funny to use. Oh, there we go. Okay, and then I can hit a turbo dry. Ooh, and the shadows. And what I think is nice about working with complementary colors, especially if you're working on a confusing or very like complicated subject, and flowers are very complicated and you can get really lost in those flower petals, it helps define where the shadow or recessed areas are, and it makes the process of negative painting a bit easier. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get I'm going to warm this yellow up just a bit by adding in a bit of my Azo Yellow Medium, which is my favorite, all-time favorite yellow. I just love this color. Okay, so now I'm gonna paint a layer of this yellow. So this is a glaze because we've let it dry all the way. It's completely dry. Now we're gonna add a second layer over the top. That's called glazing. And we're just gonna pull it over the entire lemon. I'm gonna leave the center here a little, like I want a nice highlight. Okay, and you can see that I've got this really interesting shadow. Now it's still kind of purpley, but what I'm gonna do is go back in and I'm gonna get a bit more of my Azo Yellow Medium, and I'm gonna get a bit of my, I think this is Cad Yellow Deep. Yeah, Cad Yellow Deep. Yep, there we go. And we're just gonna pull in to these bottom. I'm gonna kind of pop over here, right? And so we still have that purple that's kind of neutralizing things underneath. And it gives a really beautiful shadow because your shadows often are a little bit more neutral, right? There we go. It's a really, really cool way to build in the layers of your subject. Okay, so that is how we use complementary colors in order to create shadows in a glazing effect. And the next thing I want to do, so we're going to use this technique when we paint our sunflower, because our sunflower has all of these layers of petals. And so where we want to develop these kind of this sense of that some petals are sitting behind the other petals. You know, when you have the subject, they're all bright yellow, and so it can be really challenging to do that in a flower without getting kind of a muddy mess or losing track of where you are. And so this is where I really like using negative painting, or you know, it's both actually. It's glazing and then negative painting. Sorry about that. I feel like I'm out of practice of making these videos because it's been like 3 or 4 weeks. All right. And I'm going to start with a golden. I'm going to add a bit of my yellow here into my green, and I'm just going to paint this whole square this kind of yellowy green. Okay, I need my bigger brush. There. Okay, now what I'm going to do is dry this. Okay, I need to maybe do it not so strongly because I don't know if you noticed or not. I don't know if you can catch it on camera. This was still kind of wet, and so it actually shot the paint everywhere, which could be a cool effect. Also, all of my papers. All right. Now, let's say I want to make a nice layered leaf look. What I can do to create my first leaf shape is I'm just going to pull from my green here, and I'm going to get some yellow. Get a little yellow in there. Okay, now I'm going to paint, I'm just going to do a really simple leaf shape. But I'm not going to paint in the leaf, I'm actually going to paint around it. Okay, this is negative painting because I'm painting around the shape and I'm letting it emerge. Now this is a super quickie demonstration. All right, let's try that. Okay. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is paint another darker layer. I'm just using whatever mix I have going on in here. And let's have my leaf be like here. So I'm painting around my original leaf, but also my new leaf shape. Okay, a negative painting because I'm painting around my object. I'm not painting the shape of my object. I'm painting the kind of the silhouette, right? I'm painting around the outside of it. We do this a lot when we paint clouds in the sky. This works really well in landscapes when you're painting foliage, like layers of foliage. And you start with your lightest colors and then you start painting the shadows kind of around those lighter shapes. Okay, and there we go. Okay, now we're gonna let that dry. And now you see how we have these like layered leaves. Let's let this dry. Okay, and let's get a nice dark green happening. These are green Apatite Genuine because that's such a pretty color. We're going to add in just a touch of blue. Okay, so now let's say like we're going to have a last leaf that's sitting maybe like this up in here. And maybe it's coming down like this. That's actually a really long leaf, kind of awkwardly shaped, but that's okay. You get the point, right? And that's really all I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to demonstrate this idea in a really kind of quick way. There we go. I'm just going to keep painting around. And now we've got these three shapes that have emerged from our negative painting. Oops, there we go. A little sloppy there, but that's okay. Okay, so you can develop layers by painting around the lightest part or by painting around the object. And there's some really fun ways. Maybe we'll do that in another lesson. It's just kind of a quick little thing. You can cut out a template and you can make a really pretty looking pile of fall leaves by using this kind of technique where you start out with your yellows and then you build up some darker yellows and oranges, and each time you kind of trace around the leaf and you stack them all around on your page. There are definitely tutorials out there on that, and it is a fun one to do. It's a fun way to paint. It does help you get better at negative painting, so I recommend exercises like that. So when you paint florals and we have petals, we often use negative painting because in watercolor, of course, we start with our lightest and we build up our darker values because they're transparent. We can't go the other way around. And so we're going to use complementary colors to help us define areas, and we're going to use negative painting to keep some of those petals really light and bright. All right, I am going to put us on pause and get set up for our sunflower painting. So I'm going to make sure that this is linked. You can print this out. It's linked in your description. What I do want to do really quickly is, this is my paper, and let's go ahead. I want to show you how I make the transfer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to color on the opposite side of this. I find it easier to do. I don't need to color in the whole flower, we're gonna make a pencil, like a pencil transfer. So for me, I feel like if you put this down on something white, you can see through to the lines below. So all we really need to do is color in where these lines are on the back side. So I'm gonna take an HB pencil. You can take a softer pencil than that. So like if you have like a 2B pencil is really nice, because if it's softer, it transfers a little more easily. I don't happen to have one easy to grab, so I'm gonna use my HB. And I'm just gonna go through and color the back, the back of all of this transfer, wherever I have lines. And you want it to be kind of dark and heavy, because that is, and by, if you put it on something hard, like this table, it's a little harder to get a nice, the pencil doesn't fill in as easily. If it's got kind of a soft pad behind, when you're doing this, it fills in a little more easily. All right, and so I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna put it on pause. Why don't you go ahead and do the same thing, and then we'll turn the video back on once this is all colored in, and then we can talk about how we're gonna transfer this to this. What I'm gonna do is take my paper, which is my 9x9 square. I think this is a front, I hope so. I usually am more careful than that. Anyway, okay, and I am going to center this on top of my paper, and I'm going to use a couple of pieces of tape, and I'm going to just tape down, and I'm going to tape just a tiny bit of my actual paper and more on the board, because I don't want to add a bunch of sticky residue on my watercolor paper that's going to create some issues for me later. So what I mean by that is we're going to grab some tape, and I'm gonna tape kind of down here on the edges, right? And I'm just gonna hit the edge of my watercolor paper. And I'm gonna do that on 3 corners, but not 4. Actually, you can go like this and this. Now, the next thing is to take, I like to use my mechanical pencil for this, and I do kind of move my board around a little bit, because I like to, I try not to put your hand right down on here, because you've got all this graphite and we don't want to make a bunch of like weird prints. You could, by pressing on this or holding your hand on in there, make kind of a print. So if you need to, you can always rotate your board around in order to get to these things. And all we're going to do is trace over the top of our lines. Now, one of the things I like to check kind of early on, and this is why I leave this. Oops, here, let's actually check. Let me go like this. I've got my wrist resting on the edge of my paper. It's not where I have pencil mark, and I've made sure of that. There we go. I'm going to add a little bit of that. There we go. Now I just want to make sure, I'm going to peel this back and make sure that I'm pressing hard enough. Yep. So check and make sure you're pressing hard enough. You want to press hard enough to transfer the pencil, but not so hard that you end up like grooving into your watercolor paper. That makes sense. Like you don't want to create a divot. And you can buy just regular transfer paper. I'm kind of a cheapskate when it comes, you know, I am and I'm not. Like, I like some things really nice. I really like nice paintbrushes. I really like nice paper and nice, what do you call it? Paints. So, like, my basic supplies, I want to be of high quality. That means that I save money in other places. Like, I don't buy transfer paper. I just do it this way. Okay, I can't remember exactly which ones I have done. I think I've done those. Okay. That's the trouble with skipping around. It's better to not skip around. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is move this sideways so that I can come over here. Again, that way I can rest my wrist on the edge here without pushing into where my graphite is. And these little lines that I have in the center, those were really just lines for, you're going to notice there's a few lines in the middle of the petals. That's how I get my petal shape, is I kind of draw it from the center and then I draw the petal shape around it. We also need to look at the reference photo. We haven't done that yet, so we'll do that in a minute. We'll do that before we start painting. And I will have that posted. This reference photo I pulled off of unsplash.com. I try to use my own pictures as often as I could, but I didn't have a really beautiful sunflower picture. So this time we're using an Unsplash. Okay, and I think I've already got that one. All right, so now I'm going to go and we're just going to kind of add this little ruffly border around the edges. Doesn't have to be exact. And we are going to change some things from the reference photo. One of the reasons that I like this flower, I'll tell you that I started this tutorial yesterday, and I have a different image done, and I started painting it, and I realized that it was way too complex and not beginner friendly at all. So I had to kind of scrap that and start again tonight, and I kind of show you my progress. I'm going to really like that one, and maybe we can paint that together as an intermediate project another time. But I think for the sake of this beginner tutorial, it just wasn't quite right. Okay, so now before I remove these two pieces of tape, what I like to do is peel up and make sure that my image is all the way transferred. And it is. I have enough information here that I don't need to do any more. Sometimes if something's too light or if I've forgotten something, I haven't taken that tape off, I can easily peel it back down and then add what else I need to add in. I don't know if I think I have that petal, but okay. So that's why I like to leave two pieces of tape on there. All right, now let's peel that off. I'm going to put this to the side. When I put it to the side, I'm kind of careful. I keep these in a folder so that I can go back in and use them again. I'm going to take the tape off. Save it for later because, again, I am really thrifty about a lot of things. All right, and I'm going to put us on pause. We're going to show the reference photo, and then we're going to start our painting, which I'm so excited about. Okay, this is a reference photo that I found on unsplash.com. It was posted by Juno Joe. Juno-jo. So if you want to look on unsplash.com and be able to pull this photo, you can. All right, we've got our image transferred onto our paper, and I have some tape along the edges. My paint's ready. My color wheel is close by so that I can take a look and find the appropriate complementary color. And what we're going to start with is the background. And the reason we're going to start with the background is because it's just going to be easier to start that way. We're going to kind of carve out these petals. I think that painting in the background at the end is going to be a little trickier, and so I want to do that first. If your lines are really dark, you might want to lighten them up. I'm going to lighten up some of these. Not too much, because I do want to be able to see where my petals are layering. I don't want to lighten them up so much that I can't really find where I'm at in the picture. And again, I'm always okay with seeing a little bit of pencil, because in my mind, this is artwork, and the sketch or drawing, or even in this case, transfer, is part of the art process. Okay, I'm going to get a nice big brush. It is going to be my size 14. And our background, we're going to kind of start with a blue and fade it into a green. And we're going to have to work a bit quickly. What I like to do is think about, because we want to keep a wet edge. And now, one of the things that's nice about this particular brush is that it's a large brush, but it goes down to a really fine tip. We don't want to use too much water, because we don't want to flood out and get some weird lines around the petals. That can happen. So as your paint dries, if you're using too much water and it's kind of sitting on top of your paper, then as it dries down, you're going to get this little, almost like little outline where the paint settles at the edge, because it kind of dries down that way. So if you're getting that effect, that's why you're using a bit too much water. When I'm going to paint a background like this, and I'm going to go top to bottom, I'm kind of looking at, like, this point is a small point. So I can kind of paint from here to here pretty easily, but this is a bigger point. So I'm going to have to move faster in here, and then I can kind of stall here and here, and I can kind of stall over here, and I can kind of stall over here. So, because this is where that leaf comes across. All right, and for my background, I'm going to start with a cobalt blue, and I'm going to make a nice big puddle. And I don't want to, I'm not painting a sky per se and the leafy background. I'm just giving kind of an illusion of that. And so, and I like to pull a little violet into my blues just because I think, again, I don't generally paint straight out of the, let's add a little bit, actually, we're going to add a little green to that instead. All right, there we go. I've got a nice big puddle of that, and I'm just going to start, and I water that down a bit more so it's nice and soft. Now, this brush is a pretty thirsty brush, so I have to be careful. I want enough paint to be able to get pretty far, but I don't want to be like, I don't want to get stuck. So I'm just going to kind of pull in around those petals. And again, you got to kind of keep it moving because it's going to dry pretty quickly. This is a challenging part of this paint. And you can always go back and touch it. See how I touched it? And then I'm going to come in here and carve out this way. And then I'm just going to touch here and I'm going to touch here. And I'm going to prevent it from drying down by going back in and touching it in those places, right? And if I have a little bit of, there we go. See, that's a little bit too much. It's a little puddly, so I've got to make sure I pull that puddle out of there because I don't want to puddle up around the petals. And then I'm going to come back here and I'm moving back and forth between these two sides to make sure that I don't ever really dry out. I need to keep a wet edge. Okay, and then we're going to kind of come over here. I'm going to put a little bit of water and just some, we're going to just kind of water that out. Here's where it gets really narrow. So now I have a fairly small spot. I'm going to soak a little bit of that up. It gives me a good spot to transition and start working over here. All right. And we're going to come here. And this background is just going to be soft and loose, so it's okay if we're a little, doesn't have to be perfect. We're not looking for it to be this like perfectly solid. We got this kind of sideways petal here. Not looking for it to be like a super smooth, you know, wash. Sometimes we want something to be a super smooth wash, and we don't need that for this. It's just kind of nice. All right, so we're going to come here. And I'm drying down there a little bit, but that's okay because remember how I softened it up a bit so it'll blend easily. And we're just going to keep this moving. And what I want to do as I get here is I'm going to add a bit more green into my mix. All right, so now we're going to come here. That's where having these wells already full is easier. If you don't have that, you can just pull a little sap green into there. That would work nicely. And we're just, oops. There we go, and we're just kind of carving out that petal shape. We're painting around where our flower is going to be. And let's come back up here and do the same. And I'm going to kind of pull this in here. And if you have a mistake, remember that you can always grab a paper towel. I got a little sloppy here. I can always grab my paper towel and clean that up a little if I need to. Like here, okay? And then go back in and just kind of clean it up. There we go. Now I'm leaving this. I got to come back over here. Oops, oops, oops. See, there we go. I've got a leaf here I'd forgotten about. So this comes in like this. So now I don't have to worry about this edge over here anymore. I'm just going to focus on this one until we get down to the top of this leaf shape. I need to pull a little more paint. I'm going to pull a little bit more, a bit warmer green in there. And I'm just going to kind of pull in, let that warm up a bit, because there's more yellow now as we get to the bottom. And there's the top of that leaf. Now I'm going to start with the same kind of color here, right? And I'm going to come in underneath where this leaf is. And I want to get a bit more yellow in there. So I'm going to just kind of, there we go. Just going to kind of mix that in. Not too much, but just want to kind of It makes it interesting when we work that way. I like to play with temperature on the background when I'm doing just a loose kind of undefined background like this. I'm gonna bring that up into this little triangle here, and you can always kind of pull at it, and because this is loose, we can pull at it with our paper towel. I'm going to take this nice kind of green color here. All right, now I'm going to get my paper towel a little bit wet, and I'm going to just kind of pull at this a little bit. I just want this to be a little more textury than it is. So I'm just going to kind of pull and just give it a nice kind of textured feeling. We can go back in with a drier paper towel and pull up that a bit. Of course, the wetter it is, or the faster we do that, the easier it is to get that texture in there. We're going to just I'm going to kind of tap at that a little. Tap at it a little bit over here, a little bit over here. All right, we've just got kind of a nice textury background. Now, later we might do a little splashing around if we feel like it, but we've got a starting point, and we have negatively painted around our sunflower. So we're gonna let this dry all the way. Go ahead and put it on pause, because we don't want to start painting our yellow and having the background bleed in to the petals, or have the yellow of the petals bleed out to the background. I don't want that to happen. So we're gonna go ahead and let this dry all the way before we start working on our sunflower. And so what we're going to use is our complementary colors to define some of the shadows before we paint the petals. One of the things, now we did look at the reference photo. I really like a sunflower that has some deep oranges and purples in it. The reference photo that I found is a lot of this bright yellow. We're actually not going to paint it quite like that. We're going to take some artistic liberty, and we're going to deepen up some of those colors. So what I'm looking at is, in my shadowed areas of these petals, it's going to fall more here in these orange and yellow orange colors than it is in this bright yellow. So rather than using violet as my complementary color, I'm going to try to sit kind of here between these yellow, orange, and orange, and that means we're going to use kind of a blue or blue violet color. And the best color I have in my palette that I can do that without having to mix is French Ultramarine. I think that this is going to be a really nice choice. And French Ultramarine paints out really nice softly. We're going to keep it pretty soft. Yeah, see, this kind of sits in between here. So it dilutes out very nicely, and it's a highly transparent color. So this is going to be my color choice. My palette's a little messy. I'm not going to worry about that at all. Okay, and the brush that I'm using is my Da Vinci Maestro. This is series 35, which is their long pointed round. It is a size 5, but you see it comes to a really nice point, because we're going to be working into some of these smaller areas. We're only painting the shadow right now. We're not painting the whole petal. So you want a brush, either maybe if you have a size 3, and you just want something that comes to a really nice point, but does hold a little bit of paint. You don't want to have something that's too small, because we are going to blend it out a bit. So like a size 3, size 4, size 5, something like that. Okay, so I'm just going to get some of my French Ultramarine, and I'm just going to make a nice puddle of it here. Okay, now remember, when we're using this complementary color for glazing, we don't want to have really dark blues. We want to keep it really soft. So I'm going to make sure that I add enough water to this to keep it nice and soft. And I think what I like about this is it just helps me stay focused in my painting when I paint florals this way. It helps me really pay attention to where my highlights and shadows are. Florals can get really muddy really fast. What makes a beautiful watercolor floral is when you have these really light, delicate contrasts of this very light and soft paint on the petals where they're kind of glowing, and then you have these deeper contrasted shadowed areas, and that's how the petals are defined on the flower, but also it gives it a lot of interest and makes it expressive. And so I'm gonna take a look at my reference photo. Okay, so what I want to do too is let's define our light source now, and we're gonna do that with I'm gonna just take my pencil and I'm gonna mark. The light is kind of coming in this way, so the shadows are happening kind of behind the flower and to this side. So I'm gonna put an arrow right here to help me remember that when I'm building my shadows on these petals, I'm going to use my reference photo, but I'm also going to use that arrow to help me remember where it is that I want to put this complementary color. Okay, so I'm going to, let's just get started. Okay, so I can see right here, behind here is kind of a stronger shadow right behind where this petal is. So we're going to just go in and create that shadow. And I'm going to paint a little bit, and now I'm going to get some water, and I'm just going to soften that edge out a bit. I don't want it to be a hard edge. Right, so I'm going to soften it out, and I'm going to paint, there's a bit of shadow going on in here. You can kind of see like how there's like these little creases, and then I'm going to come right here. This flower, this petal is sitting in front of this one, and so it's got kind of a narrow shadow right here, and it gets a little bit more here. So we're going to just pull this out a little bit. We also have a bit of a shadow happening between here. So I'm going to kind of carve this out there. And you see how we are painting around this lightest shape of the petal. And I do like to add, I'm going to add a little bit of, you can see that there are these kind of grooves coming. So I'm going to make just the teeniest little groove here. And if it's a little too dark, all you're going to do is grab, that was a little darker than I wanted. So I'm just going to quickly grab my paper towel and pop it on there. And that's going to soften it up a bit. Okay, now we are going to come, there's this petal that sits behind here, and it's got kind of a darker, like it's got kind of, its creases are a little bit darker. We're going to go like that. And then it kind of creases here, and there's a bit of a shadow there, and then behind where this petal is. Okay, and we're going to use our blue, and there's a bit, we're going to carve right here too, and we're going to carve right here, because see how these three petals kind of lay against each other? I'm just going to go like that and that. We're just kind of outlining but also carving. Now I'm getting some water, and I'm just going to soften these up, all of them. This is really subtle. All right, now, again, I've got my reference photo open, and I can see this petal right here has kind of a crease. Let's see. It kind of creases right here, and I'm going to make a little, it kind of carves here. This is part of the petal, and then it also is like right here. And I use the side of my brush there because I'm just going to kind of brush it out a bit. Okay, and then I like these little triangles. I'm kind of accentuating those because I'm kind of accentuating where that petal sort of comes into a point and meets the flower. I'm going to kind of come back in here and accentuate that a bit more. All right, now let's take a look at this petal is laying over the top of this one. So we're going to just add that little bit of soft blue. And it kind of sits like this too. So we're going to go like that. I'm going to add a little bit more blue down in here because it's a little darker right there. And same thing here, like this is a little darker right there. And then we've got this little petal there. And there's a bit of extra shadow because this petal is kind of sitting up and away. So if you'll notice, that shadow comes up and it just kind of comes up like this. And it's a hard line, not a soft line. So we're going to leave that a hard line because that petal is casting a shadow onto this other petal. Where these are laying kind of close together, so those shadows are a little like they're a little thinner. This one is a bit wider. And the same thing is true right here. This one is kind of sitting up and away a little bit, and so that shadow is a little bigger right there. And then we've got this petal, which also there's an inner petal here, and so I'm going to just kind of go around where that is. And that shadow kind of is cast because it's sitting kind of up and away from the petal that it sits over the top of, and it's kind of curling, so it's got like a shadow in the center of it too. So we're going to do that. All right, I'm really liking what we have so far. Let's start working. I want to make sure, I'm always kind of thinking about my hand and where my hand is. So now I'm going to start working this way and around. If I work right here right now, I am going to sit my hand in it, and that's not going to be good. Okay, so we've got some pretty strong shadows. This shadow is stronger than I have. So I'm running out of paint here, so I'm going to add a bit more paint. All right. And so like right here, this also has kind of a cast shadow. So I'm going to pull up. I'm going to make this a little darker. Okay, that was probably a little too dark. So go ahead, and if you get too dark, I'm just going to run that paper towel right on top to pull a little bit of that vibrancy out. Make sure I use enough water. Now I'm dipping my brush and then I'm dragging it across my sponge. I'm going to show you that. I'm dipping it in the water, rinsing it off in my clear water. I'm touching it to the edge of my water jar, which is off camera, but I'm pulling it across my sponge to pull a lot of my water out. I don't want to flood this. I'm using just a little bit of water and a little bit of paint. I'm making sure that this is just really soft and subtle. Okay, so now we have right here, this petal sits behind, and this petal is really casting a strong shadow on it. So what we're going to do is paint that in like this, and we're going to come down in this whole petal. It's going to be pretty blue. Okay, and then in here, we've got kind of a little, there's like a little extra shadow here, and I want to paint those in. Okay, and this flower here has kind of a crease right here, so I want to do that. I'm going to soften that up a little bit though, by adding a little bit of water. I'm softening that edge. Okay, now this petal here, again, we've got a lot of stronger shadows happening here. So this petal is sitting on top of this one, and you can see the shadow kind of comes, it's kind of thin here, but it comes out farther here. So let's kind of carve that out. And I'm going to kind of pull this in, this darkness right here. Okay, and there's two very thin kind of creases that come in here, and I want to have those there. Okay. Now how much shape we're giving this. I'm going to soften that up just by giving it a touch of water. And then you can see there's another shadow here. Okay, now we're going to start to, some of this is going to start to get a little subtler again, or a little more subtle. Okay, so let's take, and we're going to just barely carve right here. And this has got kind of a line here. And I'm ad-libbing a little bit from our original picture, and that's okay. Okay, and then this petal sits in front of that one. So we're going to just add a little bit of that blue back here, and same thing back here, right? We've got this, and it comes like this, and we've got a bit of a shadow there. All right, and then this petal back here is in a lot of shadow right there. All right, now we're going to work our way to here. This petal is sitting behind both of these, and so we're going to see some shadowing here and here, and it's kind of thin. Actually, it's kind of deep right here. The color is kind of deep right there. All right. In my drawing, I've got that petal a little wider than in the original reference photo, so we're just going to kind of give this a little. There we go. So do you see how we're adding like a lot of definition, and we're painting around the petals? This is where, and we're adding this really nice complementary color. It's going to give us some beautiful shadowy colors. And then when we go in and I add our bright yellows and oranges and our kind of purples and reds, it's just going to have a great effect. I'm really excited about this. Definitely coming along well. Okay, so now right in here we've got this little, like these little points. So this, I'm going to darken up a little bit there. And we can go back in and make things darker. Like there's some interesting little folds in the flowers, and we can add some of those back in later. And not everything has to be done with this complementary color. We can also add some of those things in when we add the darker oranges and reds to the flower as well. So, okay, so now let's come in. We've got these petals that are laying on top of each other. So I'm kind of finding my way, making sure that I'm not getting lost. So this petal really sits on top of everything else. And so right here and right here, and this is kind of nice and dark like that. Those sit like that, and this sits like that. So like this petal sits behind everything, and it's a lot darker. Okay, and then this one, this is kind of dark in here too. So I'm going to add a little stronger blue, not very strong, but a little stronger right here. Okay, and we're going to kind of soften that up. There we go. Okay, now this petal sits right on top, so it is the lightest of this little batch here. I'm going to get some blue, a little more blue onto my palette. And again is my French ultramarine. This is a Daniel Smith color, and I just love it. Okay, so now this petal here is sideways, and it's really in shadow. Like I'm going to take almost this whole petal. You see this little one, and we're going to come like this, and it's really until the end. That whole thing is going to be in, just the tip is not in shadow, and just this kind of edge. Actually, even that edge is. Okay. And so now we have this petal and this petal here. Now we have a leaf back here. So if this is looking a little funky, that's why. We've got this leaf back here. We're not going to worry about that right now. Now this petal is casting a shadow onto this one. And you can see the tip, like the edge of the petal, this is really light, so I don't know if you can see very well, but the edge of the petal is here. And then the tip of this petal is kind of coming in like this. And then you can see it kind of coming in like this, right? So we're just going to paint in that shape. And go ahead and take a peek at the reference photo to see what I'm looking at here. And it's kind of a nice dark. Okay. And we've got kind of, we've got kind of a, like, it's kind of creased right there. Almost in like a V shape. So I'm going to do that right here, and I'm just going to pull that out with a little bit of water. Okay, now we've got this petal here, which is almost no shadow. This is a really bright petal, except for there's just a bit of a crease in the center here, right? And it kind of comes out like that, so we're going to go ahead and do that. All right, I think we're done with our complementary colors on our petals. The next thing we're going to look at is this. And do you remember we had this ring? Now this is where we're going to veer away a little bit from the reference photo. One of the things that I love about sunflowers is when they're kind of fluffy and then the center sinks down and they're like that really reddish brown color. So if we're thinking about, and so our shadow is going to kind of sit well, our light's coming this way, then our shadow is going to sit in this way because our light is hitting this, and this part is kind of concave and this part is rounded out. And so we're going to have a shadow here and then lesser shadow here. And generally speaking, this is like a yellowy brown color and this is more a purpley color. Now that's not quite, I think the flower we're looking at is a flower that has probably just opened up, and so the inside of this hasn't come out into, like, at first they're like really seedy looking and then they start to get fluffy looking, and we're going to paint it more as though it were fluffy, even though that's not what our now if you look at the reference photo, look at the flower kind of in the background. That's the kind of center we're going for. So we can see that we're going to be darker here because of the way the light works and where the shadows are going to be. And this is going to be red brown, like a reddy brown purpley color. So if we're talking about these kind of reddy brown purpley colors, what's across from there are some greens or green blues. So I'm going to paint in our complementary color. I'm going to just pull over here because I have some greeny blue colors. There we go. And I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to kind of dance my brush around because it's not even, right? And I'm going to kind of come in and I'm going to get, so all the way around this is going to be a little darker. So I'm going to use a softer version right here, right? But I'm going to use a bit heavier version right here because it's kind of concave, and so it's going to be darker. That shadow is actually going to be thicker on this side, and I'm just kind of dancing it around. There we go. And I'm going to add some water to my brush just to soften that up. Now I'm going to do the same thing. This outside is going to be a little more orangey yellow. The inside is a little more purpley, so we're going to move a little here. So I'm going to go back to like kind of a blue-green. So I'm going to grab my blue. I'm just going to do a little more blue-green. Actually, let's see. We've got a nice blue-green here. That's what we use. This is where my dirty palette is helpful. Here we go. Okay. I've got a nice kind of blue-green. And I'm going to just do a little bit of shadow around here because, and we're just going to kind of define that a little bit. We're just giving this a little bit of dimension, right? And now I'm adding some water to soften that up a bit. This just helps us not get lost in our painting, right? Okay, and I'm just going to kind of let that come around a little bit around here because it is going to come all the way. You know, you're going to see a bit of shadowing here because this part kind of rounds out and that part hollows in. Okay, now we are going to do a little bit of shadowing on our stem. We're going to use a violet color, but I'm going to not use a, when I was mixing earlier and I mixed together my violet and my yellow, that's what I'm going to use. I don't want to use a straight violet because I think that's going to be too strong. And what I'm going to do is, if you look in the original image, the shadow is going to fall along this side of the stem, right? But it's also going to be a little bit here. And you can kind of see the flower petals casting a shadow. And then we're going to be on the bottom side of this stem here. And I'm not going to worry about shadows on the leaves right now. The leaves, I don't know why I said leaves. We're not going to paint shadows on those. We can lighten this up a bit if we need to. Yeah, there we go. I'm just gonna add a little bit more to this side. And then when we go in and we go to paint that green, this part of the green is going to pop and the other part is going to be a little more neutral. And that's going to be super nice. Okay, actually, you know what? We have a cast shadow on this leaf. So what I'm going to do is, if you look in the original picture, you can kind of see the petals kind of come out like this. And we're going to take it right to on the leaf, but right to the edge of the petal. And then you can kind of see another petal kind of, it's like the sun is coming this way and the shadow of these petals is falling on this leaf. And so we're going to do that, and then we're going to bring it forward because it kind of comes forward like this and kind of comes around and kind of comes this way all the way down. And then the rest of this leaf is in leaf. Okay, there we go. It's kind of in shadow. There. All right, and see how that makes this really interesting. When we paint green over the top of that, this is going to be super interesting. All right, now what we want to do is let this dry all the way. And there are no real cast shadows on this leaf because the sun's coming this way. Maybe a little bit over in here, but I'm not going to mess with that actually. We can, if we want to go back in and add a little shadow on that leaf, we can do it at the end. Okay, so let's let this dry all the way. Once we know it's all the way dry, because we don't, if we paint on top of it right now, we're going to disturb the layers that we just painted, and we don't want to do that. We want to let this dry all the way so that when we bring, and that's part of glazing. Part of glazing is you let everything dry all the way so that you don't disturb what you have down here. So let's let it dry. We'll come back in maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and we'll be ready to paint the next layer. We are now going to glaze on our softest yellows, so the lightest parts of our petal. And I'm going to use a mix of my lemony yellow and my azo yellow medium. And so on my color swatch chart here, this is my lemon yellow. It is a Daniel Smith color, and it's called lemon yellow. And then the other thing I'm going to use is this is a Rembrandt color, and it's called azo yellow medium. It's similar to like a cad yellow medium, or yeah, it's got kind of some orange undertones. And then I'm probably going to maybe, well, not yet. Eventually we're going to pull in some cad yellow deep. But right now we're going to use these two yellows. So find something that's similar in your palette. And remember, your colors don't have to be exactly the same as mine. It's okay if your painting has different tones or hues. Every painting is going to be different from one another. Okay, so now I'm going to take that lemon yellow and I'm going to really water it out. And I'm going to make a nice pile of, and I did clean off my palette while my paper was drying. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I want to make sure that I had, yellows get contaminated really easily. And so I wanted to make sure that I had uncontaminated yellows, especially for this first layer where we want it to just really pop and be so bright and delicate. All right, so I'm going to mix my lemon yellow in a little bit here to have kind of an in-between color, because I don't want, the lemon yellow is so cool. Well, maybe, I don't know. Okay. All right. Sometimes I decide as I go. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to start just painting over all of the petals. And we're going to kind of mix between these two depending on where we're at. So like some of these petals are really, really bright, and some of them are not as bright. So this one is pretty bright, but it's not as bright. So I'm going to start with my lemon yellow, and then I'm going to pull some of my azo yellow medium in there. And the reason, and while it's nice and wet, we want to do that so that we've got it flowing really well. And you can see that it's a brighter yellow towards the tip up at the top here. And so I'm gonna make sure that I'm doing that. And then I've got my more orangey yellow towards the bottom. Now that's not the case for every petal, but it is for that petal. And you'll notice that some petals are brighter than the other one. So like this one is actually really bright. I'm gonna use just my lemon yellow for this one. And I'm just gonna pull in right there. I'm not going to worry about this so much because we're going to add in, there's going to be lots of layers to this. And now I'm going to take just down here a little bit of my darker, I need to get a better pile of that, my azo yellow medium, and we're just going to kind of pop that in here right now. Okay. This is where we get to be a little artsy about this. And we want to leave some spots that are almost white. So like I almost want to leave this a little bit white up here. We want to have contrast, more contrast than we see in the original photo, because that's part of what makes this so pretty. And so this petal here, this is a really nice bright petal. I'm going to use some water to take the yellow out to the tip here so that it's really bright and yellow. Almost white, and then we're going to pull that darker color in here, which is my azo yellow medium. I'm just going to kind of pop it in here and work that down there, because all down in here is definitely darker and we see a lot more contrast there. Okay, so I'm kind of doing that here, and we're adding some of that lemon yellow into this top part. Again, this is really nice and bright. And I want to almost leave some whites there. We've got this. This petal here is less bright and has more of this, you know, kind of orangey yellow. So we're going to pull a little bit more of that orange yellow into this petal here. And I'm just going to kind of string it up there. And then I can come back in with a bit stronger. We're going to charge. When we tip some stronger paint in, that's called charging. We're going to charge it in, and it kind of makes its way up the petal this way. Now I'm moving pretty quickly. I recognize that. If you need to, you can always play the video a little slower, or you can pause wherever you need to. I know that when you're first learning, sometimes you want to go really slow, and that I think is one of the really hard parts about watercolor, is that it can be challenging to paint slowly because your edges start to dry and then you lose some of the effects that you're looking for. Okay, so we're going to pull that out, and I'm going to get this nice dark yellow. It's really dark down in here, so we're going to tip that in, and we're going to build, by glazing more layers, we're going to build up some really pretty orangey deep reds in there. But we're just getting our first layers down right now. All right, and now this petal is pretty bright, so we are going to leave it nice and lemony yellow. Just a little bit, kind of coming up both edges this way with that darker color. I'm just really looking at my reference photos. Now these petals tend to be darker, so I'm just even going to start with my Azo Yellow Medium on, you can see especially like we've got these two petals that are sitting behind. This one is the darker of the two, is this second one. So I'm going to paint the whole petal in that Azo Yellow Medium. And I'm painting around this petal because I want to leave that much lighter. And then I'm going to use the lemon yellow in here, but I'm going to pull in that Azo Yellow Medium in here. Yeah. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that. All right, we're just going to kind of pull that up, and let's go back to our lemon yellow. I need to make my piles a bit bigger. Okay, it's a little, each time I'm dipping my paintbrush in my water, and I'm cleaning it off before I pull it out of my paint to keep my yellows from getting contaminated. But then I'm making sure that I pull some of that water off of my brush so that I don't have too much water on my brush. All right, now this petal, like I said leaf, this petal is really pretty because it's really bright. But then it actually gets nice and deep right at the center down here. Really like that, like right in here. This goes like that. And so I'm going to just kind of let that pull up and flood that way. Now I'm going to go right into this Azo Yellow Medium. And okay, so this actually is interesting because, because it's really bright at the tip, but it's got that really dark shadow. So what we're going to do is start with the lemon yellow, and I'm having to look because we've got the leaf kind of comes in here. So make sure that you're paying attention to your pencil lines. Mine are a little light right here, so I've got to double check with my reference. And now I'm going to get this nice Azo Yellow Medium, and I'm going to paint over the top of that blue kind of shape. There we go. And it's nice and dark in there. Okay. Now I'm going to have to be careful because I painted right where my wrist goes. What I should have done is started working around here. So, you know what? I think, yeah, let's work up here, but you're going to have to be really careful about your wrist. I should have been paying better attention. Generally speaking, I work from the top and I kind of work my way around but I got so intense on there that I got a little lost in what I was doing. That happens to me a lot. Okay, so now these petals are really pretty bright. So we're going to just do these in the lemon yellow. And this one is like, it's really bright. I'm actually going to leave a little bit of Yeah, it's just going to be, I'm doing that one really light. But there is some nice deeper oranges coming in here, of course, and in here. So let's do that. Okay, and then here. But the tip of this is that nice lemony yellow, nice and light. Do you see how much dimension we're getting? And we have so far to go. We're only laying down our first layer right now. So that's exciting. Okay, let's paint this petal in a lemon yellow. And we'll start with some lemon yellow over here. But then we're going to work in that darker yellow here and down at the bottom. And this has kind of a, this has got kind of a shading and that comes like that. So I'm going to touch the center of the petal there. I'm going to add a bit more actually. And I'm going to kind of come back in here and add a bit more here. A bit there. Okay. Now we are going to look at, this is pretty bright. This petals, like these petals are all really bright yellow, kind of all the way through here. We've got more darker yellows here. And I think it just has to do with how the light is hitting. So like darker here and lighter here. So we're going to use more lemon yellow on these petals than we are. I'm almost just want to come in and just go ahead and paint these in the lemon yellow, but I want to make sure that I leave some lighter, like right here, this has got some lightness to it. So I'm going to just blot up at the paper towel with that a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and paint these guys in my lemon yellow. Okay, we're just going to kind of come around and paint these as one shape. And then I'm going to go back in just at the centers and like just right in here, and we're just going to leave a little bit of this brighter color, right? But overall, these are just going to be a little bright, like the petals themselves are just going to be lighter. This little like line here is going to be nice and lemony. Okay, or not lemony, azo medium. Okay, so now we kind of continue to here and then we start to get darker again. So I'm going to continue with my lemon yellow into most of the petal shapes here. And then we're going to use our azo yellow medium. We can see that there's some like spots here and here, right? And here. This was a little much, but that's okay. Okay, and then let's use kind of a mix of our azo yellow, because the petals themselves, the color gets a little bit darker as we get into this space here. All right, and same thing right here. So we're just going to kind of paint these guys in. I'm going to keep this a bit more interesting. So I could just use a vermilion, but I'm not going to. I want to add in a bit of quinacridone rose. So let's add a bit of quin rose here, which is a nice pink. And our azo yellow medium, so the same darker yellow. There we go. See how we get this beautiful gold color? I love that. Now we want to neutralize this a little bit. So what are we going to do? We're going to add a little bit of blue green. I'm going to touch up. I'm going to add a bit of kind of this color in here, which for me is that little blue green shade. And do you see how that neutralized it? And now we have like a gold that isn't quite so vibrant. That's perfect. And that's what we're going to paint in. We're going to start this. Now that we're going to build this up much darker, but we want to have some light color to work with. So we're going to come in and just paint over this whole thing. I might need to add a little bit more of this, a little more of this, a little more of this. There we go. And we're just going to paint in here. And I'm being rough about this, and I'm letting this kind of come up into these petals here because we're going to kind of blend those in a bit, right? We're being nice and loose about it. Now we're going to take this same color and we're going to add a bit of our violet to it. I'm using a permanent blue violet, and it's a much purpley color, but because it's got that orange and pink in there with that touch of green, it's nice and neutral also. And we're going to add that into here. Okay, and we're going to let these kind of touch in some places and not touch everywhere. Okay, there we go. And that's just giving us our base for our center of our flower. We're going to work on that more. We're going to add more depth to that, and we're going to make it more vibrant, but this gives us our starting point. Okay. This is so pretty, and I'm really excited about where we're at. We want to make sure that this dries, and then when it's dry, we're going to come back and glaze in our next layer. I hope that you guys are having some success. If you're not, I don't want you to worry about it because this is practice, and if it doesn't turn out the way you want it to turn out right now, you're just going to paint it again and practice, and each time you paint it, you're going to learn a little something new, and that is part of the process of learning. So please don't be discouraged if yours is not coming out quite how you want it to. This is just your first attempt. Remember, I painted a sunflower many times over the last 3 years. I love painting them, and so my first sunflowers were definitely not looking like this. So, all right, just wanted to give a little encouragement. Keep going. Even if you're not happy, keep going anyway, because you're going to learn something, and then you're going to try again. All right, I'm going to put it on pause. We're going to let this dry, and I will see you back in 20 or 30 minutes. All right, your painting should be all the way dry, and we're going to move on to the next stage. We're going to build in some deeper yellows. I'm going to rely less and less on the reference photo now, and a bit more on my own love for sunflowers and the colors. So I'm going to leave some of these really soft yellows in here, but I'm going to build a lot more orange into this than is in the reference photo. So I just want to let you know, I do have some other sunflower pictures available to look at so that I can kind of compare more than one at the same time, and that helps me. I have another picture up that is more kind of the color reference that I want to use. I'm just gonna let you know, that's definitely something that you can do with art, and I encourage it, not to just paint exactly a reference photo. It's really nice to look at other pictures and then bring what you like out of all of those reference photos into your one painting. So, all right, so I'm gonna stick with my size 6 brush, the same brush that I was using before. And again, this comes to a really nice tip. If your brush doesn't come to quite this tip at the end, because this is a pointed round, then you might want to use a slightly smaller brush in order to be able to get have a little more control. And we're just going to start building up more and more color in here. And one of the things that I love is when we get almost these deep purples into some of these shadowy parts. And so we're not quite ready to go there yet. Right now, what we're going to do is add in a combination of some more of this deeper yellow. So I'm going to get a nice pile. We're kind of done with that lemon yellow right now. And we're going to add in this. I'm going to get a nice pile of my Azo Yellow Medium, and I'm going to pull in next to that. Ooh, I need to spray my paint down. It is dried a bit. Actually, I think I'm going to use a combination of, I'm going to go right to Cad Orange. I'm going to kind of skip over my Cad Yellow Deep. And I'm going to go Cad Orange here. So let's get a pile of that. All right, and I want to add in some quinacridone rose. All right, I think that's good for right now. We're going to kind of pull from these three, and we're going to develop the midtones more. We've got a lot of our really light values. We've got our shadows defined by this underpainting of contrast or your complementary color. Now we're going to build up those mid values. And so I'm going to do that using I'm going to start with kind of in the middle of this. I'm going to kind of pull that into. I like how we have kind of like a pinker tone. We're going to make this kind of colorful. All right, there we go. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to start on this side here. All right, so this petal, I want to pull in on top of, I'm going to actually pull some of this pinky color on top of where this shadow is. Oh, look at how pretty that is. Now, this is where our negative painting comes into play because I am not going to touch this petal or this petal. And now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of jump around a little bit because we want our edges to dry. So I'm going to pull up, and now I'm going to pull up my orange, which is my cadmium orange, and I'm just going to kind of go like this. And this is going to sit over the top of that shadow. And it should be, there we go. And yep, it's just got like a nice shadow. Now I want to take a bit of this yellowy color, and you can see that we've got just a little bit of like, I just want to kind of bring it in a little bit there and a little bit here. All right, that's it. We might develop I'm going to grab a little green. All right, we're gonna grab, I have some green over here. Maybe we'll make a pile of sap green. All right, and I'm gonna kind of mix that sap green with my yellow. And I'm just gonna come up, and you can kind of see that we've got some like lines, and it's just gonna kind of come like this, and like this, and like that. Those are kind of the lines of the petals. And I'm gonna just kind of come back down. Let's make sure we carve this petal out really nicely. There, okay. So this is this really nice shadow, but we've got this nice bright white tip because that's in the sunshine. And we've got those kind of like, like the creases in the petals. And I'm not going to do those everywhere because I think that might be a little too distracting. I'm only going to add those to some of our petals. Okay, so now we're going to skip this petal and we're going to work on this one. And the reason we're going to skip is because if I try to work on this petal, I want to keep a hard edge here. And if we try to paint in here, we might blend and soften that together. And I just don't want to do that. So, or maybe we'll work on this one. All right, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to grab our quinacridone rose and a bit of I'm kind of mixing that cad orange and quinacridone rose. I'm letting my paint kind of flood in and mix in together. And you can see that like what happens, it's interesting, even if you look in the reference photo, is that like right here, but as it gets to the tip, it almost gets a bit more green. So I'm going to let that bleed in as it gets to the end. We're going to let it kind of bleed together like that. And this kind of bends that way a bit. Okay, now this is going to blend out a little. So we're going to pull in a bit of our yellowy color here, and then like this azo yellow medium, and I'm just going to use a little water on my brush to blend that out a bit more. So do you see how we're really adding dimension and contrast, and we're really shaping these leaves. I keep saying leaves, petals. Okay, so now we're going to skip this petal and we're going to work on this one. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to use a bit more orange, a little less pink. This one's not going to be quite as contrasty. And remember that as we move down here, this was all a little bit brighter. So now I'm going to lean a little less into the purpley or the pinks, right? And I'm going to lean a little more into this darker yellow and orangey color. And we're going to just come in right here. And we're just going to give it a bit of orange to give it some definition. And our same thing, our petal kind of comes like this. All right, do you see how we're just kind of adding a bit in there? I'm leaving that really light color in the middle. If I get a little too dark, I can add a little water in there and flood it back a bit. Okay, like that. Now we're going to come in here, and I'm just going to add a bit of this azo yellow medium. I'm not even going to use anything else. I'm just going to blend it down in here. right at where the edge of that petal is. And we're just making it, you can see these are really flat against you. I might add a bit of water to push that out a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Now I am working petal, 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 but partly because I'm not going to touch the edge here. So I'm not going to have a chance of like disrupting my hard edge. Okay, and then as I get here, I'm going to add a bit of that cad orange right down into here because that gets a little darker right here. A little darker, right? Okay, now let's go ahead and work with this petal. Okay, so the reason that I can kind of, you understand why we're not skipping, right? It's because we're not letting the two edges touch. So I'm still keeping a nice hard edge here, even though I'm working on two petals that are next to each other. I'm going to add just a bit more orange in there just to give it some nice definition. Right, and same thing right here. Okay. Look at how that's really popping out. And you're seeing these individual petals and you've got this really nice contrast. I really, really like what we have happening. Now I'm going to use a bit of orange mixed in with this yellow. And we've got these we've got a little bit of, like this flower has a bit of, we're going to kind of focus on those like creases in the petal right on this one. And I'm going to add in a bit more here just to define that this petal, I'm going to soften it up a bit, is sitting behind here. Now I'm not going to work on this one because if I work, well, I can work on this edge, but I'm not going to work on this edge because otherwise I'll flood it in and it's going to bleed together. Does that make sense? I hope I'm making sense. Okay, so this gets a little bit, it's starting to get a little darker. Like these are really light petals, but it starts to get a little darker here. So I'm going to mix a little bit of my, see how I've got everything kind of conglomerating around. I'm going to pick kind of a yellowy orange and I'm just going to pull it in ever so gently right here. And I'm just going to kind of follow these lines that I had earlier. And then the same thing, we're going to come here. Right? And you see how we're just defining those. Oh, they look so nice. And I'm gonna flood this out a little bit, but not a lot. And same thing with this. I'm gonna bring a little bit of that yellow out, but I'm gonna let that edge stay nice and light. I'm gonna add just a little bit of water, but I'm not gonna touch that edge so that I keep a nice hard edge. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. Okay. And you see these are going to just stay more yellow in general, and we're going to end up adding a little bit more orange and pink as we work around those. And we're going to do multiple layers here. This is something that takes, you got to kind of work slowly on these floral pieces when we're doing these glazing techniques because you're painting a lot of layers. So they aren't immediate and fast. Now, I'm going to stop working here and I'm going to work back up here and I'm going to work around this way so that I have a space to lay my hand. I don't want to smear anything. Okay, now when we come up here, it's a little bit, these petals are a bit darker, and so we're going to work a little more in that pinky orange side of things. I'm going to need to get a little bit more quinacridone pink on my palette. And I need a bit more of my cad orange right here. Okay, and I think I need a bit more of my Azo yellow medium as well. Okay, there we go. So now, this petal has that nice dark shadow, so we're just going to go in and paint. I hope you can see that. I'm going to paint over. I'm kind of bending close because I like to get my face right into my painting sometimes. We're going to paint like that. Now, I'm not going to do anything more than that, except I might pull up a little bit. Actually, I am. I'm going to pull up a little bit of the pink and orange together right here. Get a little pink orange like that. Nice. Yeah, that's good. And I'm just going to come in right down here. I'm just going to tip in some right down here. And I'm going to let that kind of flood up. Okay? And kind of along that edge of that petal. There we go. And now let's get a little more pink. And we're just going to put that pink down in here. Okay. Oh, that's so pretty. I love that. And let's do the same thing here. We're going to get some of this Azo yellow medium. And this petal kind of comes right here. Now, be careful not to touch that edge because otherwise we'll start blending together We don't want to do that. So we're going to go like this, and we're going to get that orangey color right in here where that shadow is happening. And we're going to grab some of our quinacridone pink and tuck that in here. Just here. This whole thing is just a little darker right here. And what I want to do, this petal should be a bit more yellowy in general, especially through the center. It's just kind of soft towards the edge. You know what else? This petal is a little bit more yellow here too. So we're going to go like that. Okay. Ooh, I like that. And let's, okay, I'm kind of jumping around, but partly because as I see stuff, I'm like, oh, I need to add a bit more here or here, right? This is kind of how I work. I kind of jump around. And so it can make it a bit hard to talk through some of this, but bear with me, please. All right, there we go. Isn't that pretty? Okay, so this flower here is sticking out kind of like a sore thumb. So what we're going to do is get a little azurel, and I'm going to be careful because if I touch the edges, I'm going to soften them, and I don't want to do that. But I am going to get some of my azurel, and I'm going to take it right up next to, but not on top of the edge. There we go. Because we're just going to build a bit more color in there. And this is the kind of thing that as we go, we're going to discover what we need, right? So this is just part of the process. For me anyway, this is part of the process. I think this is developing so nicely. Oh, we've got these like really brilliant colors, then with these more muted colors. And I'm so happy that we went in and did some of that contrast, you know, the complementary color, because look at how beautiful that shadow is. I love that. All right. So let's take a bit of yellowy orange, and we're just going to add that in around here. Let's fix this a bit, because I think this is getting a little, I want to say muddy, but it just needs to be fixed a bit. Okay. I'm going to skip this petal, and I'm going to go along, and we get kind of light again, or lighter right here. So we're going to kind of very gently add that yellow here. And I'm going to just kind of pull it this way. And the same thing here. We're just going to kind of develop, I'm just the very, very tip of my brush along here to add just a little bit. And we're going to leave this mostly bright. It's going to add a nice contrast. Now we've got this petal here that's kind of sideways. So we're going to color that in almost all of that darker color. And do you see how we've got so much shape happening? You really see the layers of the petals. This is what's so exciting. And this is that negative painting. We're painting around the petal to create this shadow and dimension. Now I am going to pull in a little bit. If they start to get a little too stark, like this one is, I'm going to pull in a little bit, and I'm going to kind of pull it in that shape here. And I'm going to pull this one in a little bit like that. And I'm going to pull this one in a little bit to give it a little bit more shape like that. And you see I'm leaving some of that really soft yellow that gives me this really highlight. It makes it look like it's glowing. So we don't want to cover over all of that original lemon yellow. We want it to be almost white, because that's how, and then when we add those contrasts and those darker colors, it just looks like it's, you know, like the sun is just coming off of the paper. That is the beauty of watercolor. That's what makes watercolor so pretty for florals. Okay, now this petal is interesting because it's really light, but it also has some darker bumpy spots. Now we're not going to do that so much, but I am, and it's got almost a little bit of like orange to green. So I'm going to kind of come in here and do a little bit of that bump like that. So I've got a little bit of that bump, like it's almost like the petals creasing. I'm going to touch a little bit of green, and the green kind of comes up right here. So I'm going to just, I always have some green mixed up on my palette in this well. I suggest that, like, it's always nice to have a little green to pull from. And I'm just going to add a little bit of green right in here. You see how that worked? I really like that. Okay. And it just gives it that little, like, I'm going to add just maybe a touch of green here. There we go. We're going to let that touch. Do you see how now all of a sudden it looks like that petal is kind of folding and rippling? Because it is. And I'm going to lighten it up. So this is a little stronger than I wanted it to be. So I'm going to lighten it up right here. And see, now it's got that really like foldy, funky look. I love that. we're going to go back in with a bit of our quinacridone rose. I'm going to mix it in with that deeper orange, and we're just going to strike up this petal a bit more. Now that looks really strong. It is pretty strong. I'm going to pull some azo yellow in, and we're just going to kind of pull it up. And the same thing, and then let's do a little lighter version of that, so a little more yellow into that orange you see right here. And we're gonna pull in this a bit more, a little bit, and maybe just a touch of that pink down here. Okay. All right. I think that's really pretty. Now this petal is a bit darker, and it's a bit darker, a bit more orange towards the base. So we're going to go ahead and paint this way. We're going to add that orange, and then it kind of comes up and it's orange like this, but then there's kind of a crease, and that crease has a little bit of green in it. So I'm going to grab a bit of my green right here, and I'm just going to touch it in just to this edge. And then you can see that there's another spot where it kind of comes up with a little bit of green. Same thing here, and it kind of bends and pushes. Do you see how we bent and pushed it? And now it's nice and orangey towards the base. So we're gonna add a bit more orange here, right? And even maybe a bit of pink just in here. Okay. Oh, see how much depth is here? I just love that. That's super fun. Okay, I'm gonna add a bit more pink here and a bit more pink here. Bit more pink here. We're just gonna add a bit more depth in there. Okay. And I'm just kind of looking and kind of going back and forth and back and forth. I'm gonna add a bit more yellow here, but not too much. That was maybe a little too much. Maybe not. Okay. This is looking so nice. Okay, so now this petal here is pretty bright, and so we want to leave it nice and bright. I'm going to add a bit more of this azo yellow medium. I'm going to kind of refresh my pile here, and I'm just going to come up. It's got there's a little bit of creasing here. You can see like the petal coming here and then like here, and so I'm going to kind of let that happen. And there's a bit of green in there. I'm looking really careful at my reference photo and trying to pick up all these subtle changes in tone. And so there's a bit of green right here, and I'm gonna add that in, and there's a bit of green here. Overall, this is pretty light, so I'm gonna leave that like that. I'm actually making this quite a bit lighter than the original reference photo, but I wanna have some really bright petals like that because I think that helps build some contrast with the other petals. All right, and now here we've got like a spot that's back here and a spot that's back here that's really dark. So I'm gonna grab some of my pink, and let's grab some of the cad orange and pink, and we're just gonna build in right here and right here. And I'm gonna work with this petal a little bit more a little later. Okay, I'm gonna add maybe a little bit of that here so that we've got a little darkness there. And then we've got a lot here. This petal is pretty dark, right? And this one is pretty light. So I'm adding a bit more orange there. Now let's pick up some of our azo yellow medium, and we're gonna kind of flush that out a bit. And again, I'm checking with my reference photo. And I'm just kind of looking like, okay, where does that color really dark? And it kind of comes up like in a line. And then on this side, that line is a bit greener. So I'm going to kind of bring up a green line right here. And there's a bit of green here too. So I'm just tipping in some of that green. Okay, I really like the way that looks. We are going to go back and we're going to leave this petal alone. Let's work on this petal. And so the reason I want to leave this alone is I don't want to have any wet edges touching. We're going to start with this orangey yellow color, and it's going to come down in here. I need a little more orange actually. And we're just going to kind of fill in where we have this darker, and we're working on this petal that's sitting behind this lighter petal. And remember we painted that shadow in before. I'm going to let some of that stay, that bluey color, because I think that's kind of what it is. And then we're going to pull out, this is actually kind of bright right here. I'm going to pull a little bit more of the lemon yellow. We're just going to make it a little brighter because it's kind of getting lost. All right. There we go. What do we think of that? I like that. Okay, it might be a little too bright. If it's a little too bright, you just go ahead and pull a little bit of that out with your paper towel. I'm going to put a little bit back. I pulled a little out of that shadow. Okay, and I want to add a little bit of pink down in this, like this area here. And then we've got another spot right here. And this petal is sitting behind, and it's almost completely, I don't know that it's completely in the shadow, but we're going to make it that way. So we're going to make it almost all orangey gold color right here. So let's add some more of our azo yellow. And I'm just going to pull that in there. All right, get a little more water in there. There we go. There, and that's separate from this petal. Add more of that orange in there. Ah! I was scrubbing at it and I just hit it there. Okay, so that's a nice thing, right? You can pull that paper towel up and really quickly act, and I fix that there. Okay, because I was pushing my brush this way and it just kind of flipped in a weird way. All right, and I want to add a bit more of the pink down in here. Oh, this is really coming out nicely. Okay, we've got so much contrast. I hope that you are happy with what's going on your paper. All right, so now I'm going to come back in. We've worked here. Let's work a little bit down in here. Let's work in this flower. Okay, so this has one petal sitting on top of it. This is the top petal right here. And so we're going to just take a bit of our azo yellow medium, and I'm just going to, from the center of it, just going to give it a bit more color without touching the edges, because I want the edges to stay dry. And then I'm going to touch a little bit of orange into this like little center part right here. Right? Okay. Maybe even a bit more pinky orange right here and here. Okay, there we go. And we're going to do that kind of over here too. And then let's get some of our azo yellow medium, and we're going to kind of pull this out a bit. There we go. But I'm leaving those edges really light. I'm actually going to come back up here and do that with a few of these lighter petals, because I think they're almost, some of them are too white. Now I don't want to do that with all of them. I got to be careful. And I'm going to bring in a little more color here. I'm just kind of bouncing around. I'm looking at stuff and I'm going, okay, where do I need more color? Where am I washed out? Where am I really happy with how light that is? I really love the shape of that petal. That's super nice. And I know that this edge is getting lost, but once we paint this green in here, the edge will come right, it's going to give nice contrast with the green. Okay, so let's work on this double petal, which is a little tricky. So we're going to start with this orangey, I've got kind of this orangey, yellowy, kind of pinky mix all in the middle here. And I'm just going to paint in the center of that really carefully. And then I'm going to paint in with a slightly darker, pinker, orangey, like right behind it, because this petal is sitting on top of this other petal. And then as I get to the edge of this, let's get some azo yellow medium, and I'm going to make this whole petal just a little bit darker until we get to the very tip, right? So we're just going to kind of pull it this way and this way, and then as we get to that very tip, it's going to be a little bit lighter. You see how we're pulling it out that way? And I'm going to pull in just a bit here. I'm just dropping or charging. When you're dropping just little bits of paint in, you're charging it. Now, if you find when you're dropping your paint in, you're getting some really weird blooms, it's because you have too much water in your brush. You want to make sure that when you drop paint into wet paint, that all you're doing is adding pigment. You're not adding any extra water. That is definitely a trick that is, I think when you're a beginner, it's kind of hard to see that. That's why I use this sponge. I have the sponge next to my water jar, and I use that sponge to pull out as much water as I can, so that I have a very dry brush with just a little bit of water, and I'm just dropping that paint in. So let's do that here too. Okay, and then I'm going to add just a touch of that pink, and I'm just dropping it in. Okay, let's leave this petal and let's work on this one. Okay, so this one is going to be, I need to add a bit of cad orange here. I need to add a bit more of my quinacridone rose over here. So I have some nice piles of paint to work with. Now there's not a lot of water in here. It's mostly paint. Same thing over here. You can see, and I can tell that because it's not flowing all over my tray. If it's flowing all over my tray, that means I have a lot of water, not a lot of pigment. You can always, if your tray is really wet, you can always grab a paper towel, wipe it off so that you have it dried out again. We want to be careful so that we're not adding too much water. All right, now I'm going to add, I'm going to deal with this. We're going to come back and deal with this shadow later after that area dries. But we're going to do this shadow here. And so I'm going to come along with my cad orange. And then I want to add in some of my azalea. I just wanted this petal to be a little brighter in general. So I'm going to add a bit of that. And then let's take our pink and we're going to just touch it into just that edge. Okay. Now we have another layer down. That's so exciting. Let's work on this a bit. Okay. I have, what I love is, this is going to be startling, but don't worry. We're going to mix up a beautiful kind of brown color, and we are going to leave, we're going to like scribble our brush all over here so that we've got some lighter colors left. When a sunflower has been blooming a little bit, it's like they've got these little like mini, they're not petals, I don't know what they are, but they're like on the ends of the seeds, and they're like these little yellow bits, right? And then it's really dark because we've got all these seeds that are bunched up together in here. And so we're going to mix up a beautiful brown, and I'm going to start with, let's see. Oh gosh, how do I want to do this? We're going to make our own. Okay, we're going to take, if you want to use a nice rich brown, if you have a nice rich brown, go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to start with my, actually, let's make this easy, not hard. I'm going to start with my my burnt sienna, which is this color. Now, burnt sienna is very transparent and it's a bit granulating, so it's a nice color to use. And I'm going to have my blue violet next to it, and as I pull those two together, I get this really nice rich brown. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through here and we're just going to scrubble along. That's the word, scrubble, so that we are leaving yellow bits, right? And some parts are going to be a bit more purpley and a little bit darker. We're going to do that on purpose. And some parts are going to be a bit more, a bit lighter with this burnt sienna, right? And I'm just going to kind of come along and just kind of scribbling so that we're leaving some of that lighter color below. And then we're going to grab some of that purple. We can get a more intense version if we want to. And it's going to be a little darker towards the edge there, right? Towards, especially as we get down here. Remember that this part is going to be more in shadow in general. Going to go back up and mix. All right, this is kind of fun. We might do this more than once so that we have a couple of layers of this. I don't know. We're going to decide as we go. I make a lot of decisions on the fly. Kind of as a painting starts to shape up, I'm like, okay, what do I need to do next? You know, how do I want this to look, or how do I want to shape this? How do I want to depthen or stylize? All right, so we've got a nice, I love my permanent blue violet and my permanent blue violet and burnt sienna just make a beautiful color. Okay, so, and I'm using a bit more purple as we're getting into this shadowed area. I'm going to go back in and add a bit more here. All All right, and as we get to that middle, it's a bit lighter, a bit more of the burnt sienna, a little less of the purple. We're just going to go around. I need to get, let's see, let me get a bit more of that. It's like a nice reddy brown. Okay. And I'm just kind of flouncing my brush around and making this like little squiggly pattern so that this is just like mark making. All right, and I'm gonna come back up around here and keep going. And we might, like I said, we might add some darkness over here. We might not. I don't know. We're gonna wait and see how dark we want this to be. Now it's going to be a little darker towards the inside here, right? So we're going to kind of pull a little bit more of that purple in just around here. And a little bit more around here. I'm just kind of dancing around. Dancing around. I'm just scruffling it. Making these fun little marks. Oh, isn't it starting to come alive? Okay, we just want to kind of mark around here. Oh, I need a little more paint on my brush. Okay, now I definitely need it to be darker than that, but I think I tend to go layer by layer because I don't want to end up going so dark and then being really disappointed with it. So now what I'm going to do, but I do know that the center needs to be nice and dark. So I'm going to mix more purple in, and I think I'm going to pull a bit of my cad orange. And the reason I'm going to pull the cad orange in is because it's a bit stronger color than the burnt sienna, and it's a bit more, it's got some, it's semi-transparent. It's not quite as transparent as I can add a little more burnt sienna in, but the problem is that I think I need a deeper color, and I'm going to have better luck getting that deeper color using the purple and the cad orange. There we go. Okay. And a bit more of my violet. Ooh, okay, that's almost all violet. Sometimes it takes a few tries. There we go. Okay, that's what we're looking for. Okay, so that's what we're going to do inside of here. And this is going to be almost all. Some of it's a little green. I feel like I need to add a little bit of yellow over here. And we're going to just kind of add a bit of yellow in here. And then we're going to pull our purple in. And most of this is pretty solid. And if we need to add a bit of I'm just going to use some of my green mix that's already in here. And I'm going to pop that in here. Actually, let's grab a little bit of sap green just to reinvigorate that. And we're just going to add a little green in there because there just should be. Okay, I've got a little too much water. It's going to start blooming, so I'm going to pull some of that water up. I'm going to be really careful here. It's easy. I was mixing paint, and then I didn't pull enough water off of my brush. So let's go ahead and still have too much water. Here we go. There we go. Okay, now let's pull some of this into there. And if you start getting muddy, like I'm starting to get a little bit muddy in here, I wasn't regulating my water well enough. And so I got a little muddy, and I don't want to wreck this. So I'm going to stop and let it dry. And that's a really good thing to do. If you start to muddy, stop what you're doing and let it dry, and you can always glaze over more later. Okay, so we've started to develop this. I think I'm probably going to pull a bit more of my sienna into here. And I'm just going to kind of dance it around. I think this is a little too I want to just darken the whole thing up a bit. So I'm going to pull some burnt sienna in, and I'm just going to kind of dance that around, especially on the edges. I'll leave some of that lighter right along this rim here, but I think we're going to just kind of, yeah, darken that up a bit. And then I'm going to get a little bit more of my purple with my sienna. This is burnt sienna and permanent blue violet. And we're going to just kind of, yep, make it a little darker in here. A little bit darker in here. See how we're adding a lot of dimension to this? I really like what's happening. And a little bit more of the sienna kind of around the edges here. The sunflowers are, sometimes the centers are almost black. We're not going to do that. But I'm just kind of dancing and charging that purple in. And I'm making sure, again, remember in that center, I started to have a little too much water on my brush. So I stopped right away. I'm trying to make sure I don't have too much water on my brush here because I don't want to wreck what I have. All right, and let's kind of pop in here. I'm just gonna kind of darken this up a little bit. We're gonna let some of that golden yellow shine through, but we're gonna darken up a lot of it. All right. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to add a bit more of that purple into here. And I'm just, again, I'm dancing my brush around. It's kind of like, and if you're having trouble with that, you can hold it at the end. Like holding your brush at the end makes it a bit easier to dance. All right, so now I'm going to take this purpley color in here. I'm going to make it really dark, and I'm going to pull into here, because I want it to be really dark in here, right? And I'm gonna add a little bit of that purpley color along here. I want to just really make a nice contrast so you can see that there's a lot of dimensions to this, right? And we're gonna let that come up there. We've got a little bit here. And now let's pull that raw sienna out again. And we're just gonna kind of pull that in here. I'm pulling raw sienna, not a lot of water. Be really careful not to add too much water. And I'm gonna leave a little bit of a highlight with that bit of green right there. I'm gonna pull this up the rim a bit. There we go. Oh, look at how much this is. I'm really, really happy with that. Look at how much dimension. Now there's a lot, you know, it's pretty wet, so it's pretty shiny, but there's just a lot of dimension to that. It's really developed well, and I love how I have that little bit of green with that brown kind of pushing in here. It's very, it's kind of expressive, and we're not trying to make it just look like it's painterly. You know, this is a painting, and it should look like a painting. Okay, so I'm going to move back to the petals, and I'm going to be okay. If this runs a little bit in the petals, that's okay. We're actually going to bring some of this into those darker parts. I'm going to switch back to my bigger brush. Again, this is my 6, but it points out really well. So if you need to use a smaller brush for this, go ahead and use a smaller brush. I'm going to grab this yellow color, and some of my petals are just feeling a little washed out, and I don't want that. Now I'm going to have to be careful because I want to have this light bright look, but I don't want to be washed out either. I want to have these vivid yellows. And so I'm going to just come in with this azo yellow medium, and we're just going to start coming in and just kind of brushing in some yellow, right? And I'm leaving some highlights, but I'm brushing in some yellow so that we have a much brighter flower. And when I'm doing that, I'm leaving the highlights by the edges. Do you see how the edges of the flowers are staying? And I'm being a little expressive with it. I'm not going to be too tight, if that makes sense. And we're going to come in here, and we're just going to, yeah. And I'm trying to be kind of loose with my brush, and I'm just dragging it across the painting. Oh, look at that. And now all of a sudden we're just more vivid, which is what we want because sunflowers are vivid. And we're going to go like that. And I'm just, this azo yellow medium, this nice, really pretty yellow. I'm just going to do a little bit more here. Just gonna kind of step back, but I gotta make sure that I leave some of these petals, you know, what they are. I don't wanna cover everyone. So don't go in here, and you can always do it, like if you're a little nervous about this, what I would say is you can always go in and keep layering over, right? So like if you want to go a little more slowly, you can go a little more slowly. If you know, if you don't want to come in quite so harsh, you can do this in multiple layers. And if we get a little too dark, like right here, you can always pull up some of the paper towel. Okay, I feel like, yeah, it was looking a little washed out to me. And I'm not dry brushing. Okay, and you know what we can do too is we can always go back to this lemon yellow in a few spots. Like here where I want them to be really, I'm gonna use a little bit of lemon yellow because these were a little brighter and the sun was hitting them and making them a little cooler. Okay, there we go. Now I'm gonna do the same thing here with this one. And then we're gonna go back to this slightly warmer yellow for the rest of these petals. Oh gosh, isn't that pretty? We're just glazing over the top. Okay, I love it. Okay, so I'm gonna do that lightly on over the top of this one. And now I'm gonna let that dry. Actually, no. I'm gonna take a smaller brush. So now I'm gonna go to my size, I think I'm gonna use my size 4 pointed round, which gets to a really nice skinny point. You could use a size 3. A size 2 is probably a little too small. And I'm gonna pull in a little bit of this purple into my pink. And it's gonna be this nice, vivid, beautiful color. And I'm just gonna come in and we're just gonna kind of depthen some, like depthen. We're gonna add where some of these points are. I'm gonna be careful because I don't want them to flood, right? But I want to just add a bit more vividness to where we're carving these petals are, where we've got these like darker shadowy areas, so that we've got a really nice, I'm going to come up here, I'm going to be careful about where I put my hand, and I'm just going to pull some out here, I'm going to pull some here, here, and even in some of the centers of these, I might use a little cad orange for that, because remember these petals kind of bend in the middle a bit, and we might want to add, we might use a combination here, like here. Okay, we're just going to add a bit more color here. Okay, and like here, this flower here, we're going to do the same thing where we're adding a bit of, we've got a bit of color that we're adding here, and add a little bit more of that purple in here. If it gets a little too purple, we can add a bit more Quin Rose back in, but we're just trying to give it a little bit of like, yeah. And I'm going to add a bit of cad orange, especially in these darker sides. Remember, this was a little darker, and so when it comes to this part, all of these petals just were kind of, they were, if you look at the reference photo, this side is generally darker and had a bit more orange to it. And so again, go slowly. If you're nervous, go slowly. This whole thing should be a bit darker than that. There we go. Okay, and I'm just kind of adding some depth to these petals and adding some orange and just kind of, you know, just kind of play with it a little bit. And if it gets too dark, just pull out your paper towel and blot at it until it's right where you want it to be. I'm going to add a bit of this purpley color down in here and down in here where I really want to show that we've got these layers of petals, right? Isn't that looking nice? All right, and now remember this side was a little lighter and this was a little lighter, so where we're a little lighter, I'm gonna lean more to the yellowy orange when I'm coming in here. And kind of making, there's almost like a little like inverted triangle right at the beginning of this. I'm gonna draw some of those colors up. Yeah, and let's pull a little bit of pink into this one. There. Okay, we are almost done. If you have been with me this whole time, I know this painting took a while. I hope that you are, again, happy with what you've got. I don't want you to feel discouraged because this is definitely pushing skills for sure. But I think it's good to see the whole process, even if it's a bit challenging. I'm going to add a bit of purple in right down here. I'm going to make this nice and dark. Let that blend in. Some of them I'm going to let kind of blend to the center, right? So that's why we're using some of that purple. There we go. And here, I'm definitely going to do that here. And here, we're just adding shape to everything. And a lot of depth. And this is a bit lighter here. I'm going to add a bit more orange right into the centers of these. Not so much the pinks. We're going to keep this a bit lighter. You know, same thing here. Okay. I think I'm going to be satisfied with this for now. And this is the kind of thing that you can go back in later and you can paint more layers in. Sometimes that's okay. A little dark, but that's okay. Sometimes I'll kind of go back and look. I don't want to get too caught up in all of those little lines. The petals have a lot of creases and lines. I don't want to get caught up in those because I think it might kind of take away from, I might add, you know, just in a few spots, but I think it might take away from the overall picture. So I don't want to do that. I do like to add a bit more orange in towards the center of the flower because I think it just kind of says fall. You know, more orange than is in the actual picture. That's just a personal preference. I'm going to kind of go like this on that one. Okay. Now let's finish up on the leaves and be done with this baby. I'm going to switch back to my larger brush. I'm going to use sap green. Sap green looks like this. And we're just going to give a nice even coat over the leaves. I'm going to do kind of a light. I'm going to mix it up over the top of, I've got kind of some older yellow that's sitting here. So if you want to take your sap green and mix a little bit of yellow in there to give it a nice light color, you can. I would use this lemon yellow, which we used earlier in our flower. And now we are just going to go ahead and paint over our leaf. Now, I'm being careful on my petals. There's a little green there. And we're going to go like this. Okay. And let's do the same thing here. We've got our, I'm going to paint around these petals. I need a bit more sap green in here. A little too light. They just splashed. That's okay. We splashed right here. I'm going to pull that up. Okay. All right, we've got the start of our petal, or our leaves. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my reference picture and see kind of how my lines are working on those. Okay, so they have veins that kind of come down this way. The way that I'm going to make that happen is by mixing my sap green, a darker version of my sap green. Okay, and I'm just going to use sap green with maybe a touch of violet in it. And that's going to give me a nice kind of really muted green. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to paint in where my shadow was to start with, right? Make that petal nice. I'm going to be really careful around the edges of my petals. Make a beautiful drop shadow, very realistic. And I'm going to pull in here. Now here's a little trick. I'm using the tip of my brush. And I'm actually going to connect this shadow with the green. It just makes for a really nice little effect there, and it just kind of softens everything. I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay. And let's go here. Now, as I come here, I'm going to lighten this up a bit and pull it this way. Let's go like this. I have like this weird, I don't know why I have this green over here. I don't usually have it on that side of my palette. Usually I have it over here. Okay, so now I've got a little blue mixed in here. It's like a darker green. And I'm just going to come right along here while it's still wet and here. Because I'm going to let that fade softly. And while this is still wet, I'm going to come right here. And that's going to fade over, and it's just going to give a nice highlight. You can see that the stem is a little highlighted here. Actually, this is mostly dark, so let's make that mostly dark. And then it's got like a little light right there. Okay, so now for this leaf, what we're gonna do is take this like darker color. So I've got this kind of mix, right? And if you don't have a mix, you can use your sap green and then pull a little bit of, you know, any of your blues actually. We used French ultramarine before, so that would probably be a good color to just kind of unite everything. So pull a little bit of a French ultramarine in there to give it kind of a bluey color. And we're going to, we have some, in this leaf, we've got some veins. So what we're going to do is we are going to negatively paint around those. Now this is tricky. What I'm going to pick is I'm going to come up, and I'm kind of looking at my veins. Like this is the top of my leaf, right? And my veins are coming this way. So I'm just kind of painting up like this. Now I'm definitely not painting as many veins in this as there actually are. I'm going to paint a little triangle here, but I'm going to paint right over the top of my other shadow so that we keep that. And then we're going to paint here. And then like, we're going to do kind of a triangle. Yeah, kind of a triangle there. And paint around that. There we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so do you see how now we've negatively painted around where the veins are? And we're going to do the same thing on this leaf, and how these veins go, I'm looking at the reference photo, is they're kind of coming down this way. So like this is the center of my leaf, right? If you can imagine, so like my main, so I'm gonna, this is the center. It's coming down this way. So my vein is gonna kind of pick up from there and this way, and there and this way. And then I'm going to make kind of a triangle, and I'm going to make my brush skinny right there, right? Like that. We don't have to be exact about this. I'm going to make another triangle here, and I'm going to kind of make a vein that comes down this way, and it's going to come down this way. It's going to kind of branch, right? Like that. Okay, now this leaf kind of bends. We're going to kind of go like this. And from this side, it's going down this way, right? And I want to bring this up nice and close. This is kind of that main, like there's a main center, right? And so, and we're going to kind of bring it down like this. Now, this side, I'm not so worried about. This side, I'm going to be a little more like particular with. Okay. We're going to kind of come this way. And like this, right? And I'm just kind of filling in these triangles of where those veins would be. This is tricky, and I know it's tricky. Because you've got to kind of envision that leaf. And if you're not very familiar with plants, or you haven't done a lot of painting or studying of them, then this is going to be harder. If painting plants and flowers is something that you really want to do in the future, then I suggest you take lots of photos, look at the patterns of things, so that you can kind of, like, I'm doing this without a reference. I don't need a reference photo for this because I've studied enough times, and I'm just kind of leaving this, like, I'm leaving some white spaces. I'm not making sure it's exact there, right? And now we're going to come down. We've got this, like, center line, and I'm going to come down here. We're going to come down here. I'm not going to worry about the veins right here, right? But I might right near the edges here. So I'm going to kind of come down here, and by the edges, a lot of times they're kind of like, there's like these little triangles cut out. So we're going to kind of do that. And again, one of the things you can do to kind of join things together is pull that green. I'm going to pull it all the way from the center down this way. There we go. Okay, and we've got this kind of, there we go. All right. Oh my gosh, I'm really happy with that. I kind of lost the shadow there a little bit. So what we're going to do is go back in with a bit of violet and French ultramarine and sap green. I'm going to mix all three of those colors together. Ooh, a little more violet. There. Ooh, isn't that a beautiful dark green? And I'm just going to come in right here and redo that, because I think that was something I really liked, was how you could see the petals casting down on there. We're going to bring that up here. And in there. Okay. And the same thing, it kind of comes down here. And you can see like the petals are kind of shaped here. There. And then I'm going to bring that down here. I'm going to just darken this up a little bit because we've got a nice shadow there. And if we get too dark, or I'm going to like use a little water to blend that out. And then I might add a bit more of my purpley, my quinacridone violet, and sap green together. There we go. A little more sap green. Ooh, there we go. Got this really nice dark. A tiny bit of my French ultramarine. And we're going to do that here. We're going to just have a nice kind of shadowy. Okay. Just going to kind of shadow that in there and shadow that in. I'm just charging some of that in there so it's nice and shadowy. Okay. All right, I think we're going to call this done. Now, I could darken up in here, but I don't want to. I think that if I do that, I'm going to start to maybe a teeny bit. Maybe a teeny bit. Okay. Yeah, maybe a little bit in here. Just say like this leaf is, there we go. I'm going to go a little darker. Be careful about going too dark. But I don't want it to have a nice contrast. Okay. All right. I think our sunflower's done. Now we could go back in and we could develop a little bit more pinks and oranges in here. But the more we go in and we kind of mess with this, the more we can, like, stop when you're ready. You know, stop when you're ready, because I think sometimes we can do too much and then we start to lose the contrast that we have with, you know, like, yeah, you know what? We're going to leave it alone because, like, I have a tendency to do too much. Let's see. I might want to add a bit more. Like, there might be some spots where I just want to have some really vivid color. Maybe here, right? And so we can do that. We can add in a bit more vivid color in some of these places. And I'm just going to kind of pull in. I'm using a really intense of my Azo Yellow Medium mixed with a little bit of Cad Orange. And I'm just going to add some of that, like, really brilliant color in. But I don't want to do too much. So I'm going to do it to this part of the flower and this part of the flower that is that darker part, remember, but this was kind of light, so I'm going to leave that alone. So I'm going to kind of pull into a little bit here, a little bit in here. All right, I'm done. I don't want to add too much. Okay, I hope that that went well for you, that you enjoyed this paint along. I know that this was a little tricky, but I definitely encourage you to keep going. What I want